My husband demanded everything in our divorce. He wanted the $4 million Buckhead mansion, the fleet of luxury cars, and 100% of the investment firm he claimed to have built from scratch. He left me with nothing but our 6-year-old twin children, assuming my silence was a sign of total defeat. My own lawyer looked at me like I was insane when I agreed without a single fight. In that sterile mediation room, my husband smiled, completely convinced he had finally put me in my place. But as he signed the final paper, he had absolutely no idea what he had just legally bound himself to: 100% ownership of Blackwood Financial. The mediator read the terms aloud, his voice echoing in the cold, windowless conference room in downtown Atlanta. The deed to the Buckhead estate, the Porsche, the Mercedes, and sole control over the joint offshore investment accounts. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the polished mahogany table. Across from me sat Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom Tom Ford suit, making sure the fluorescent light caught the face of his diamond-encrusted luxury watch. It was a timepiece I had purchased for him 5 years ago when he finally secured his first major client back, when we were actually a team back, before the money warped his reality. Now, he wore it like a weapon to intimidate me. My attorney, a seasoned family law expert named David, leaned in close to my ear, his breath sharp with panic. "Simone, you cannot agree to this," he whispered frantically, his pen tapping nervously against his legal pad. "He is taking every single asset you helped build. You have a legal right to half of that firm. We can take this to trial. We can tear him apart in front of a judge. You are walking away with absolutely nothing." I did not look at David. My eyes were fixed entirely on Marcus. At 36 years old, Marcus had spent the last 3 years transforming from a hard-working financial advisor into a walking, talking caricature of Atlanta's new elite. He cared far more about reserving bottle service at exclusive nightclubs and being seen with local celebrities than he did about the actual day-to-day operations of his business. And clearly he cared vastly more about his public image than his own family. "Well," Marcus said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension, "are we going to sit here all day, Simone? I have a tea time at the country club at 2 o'clock. Just sign the papers. You know you do not have the stamina for a drawn-out legal battle. You never could handle real pressure." I slowly reached into my leather portfolio. "I will sign over the house, the cars, and the entirety of Blackwood Financial," I said, my voice completely level and devoid of any emotion. "On one condition." Marcus scoffed, leaning back in his expensive leather chair and crossing his arms over his chest. "Here we go. Let me guess, you want massive alimony to fund your little public sector lifestyle. You want me to subsidize your rent in whatever suburban apartment you end up moving into. I want full physical and legal custody of Jamal and Jada," I stated, cutting sharply through his arrogance. 100% sole custody of our 6-year-old twins. No shared weekends, no holiday splitting. You sign away your parental rights today. In exchange, I waive all rights to child support. You will not owe me a single dime for their upbringing for the rest of their lives." David gasped audibly next to me. "Simone, no, you cannot do that. The children deserve financial support." But Marcus's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. The prospect of keeping all his money without paying child support for the next 12 years was far too intoxicating for him to pass up. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the conference room walls. "You really are weak, Simone. You are letting maternal emotion cloud your financial judgment. You are walking away with 2 kids and a basic government salary. How do you expect to raise them in the lifestyle they are accustomed to? You are going to struggle." "I will manage," I replied softly, keeping my gaze locked on his. Marcus leaned forward, planting his manicured hands heavily on the table. "I built an empire from the ground up. I created generational wealth for the Blackwood name. You were just an accountant along for the ride. It is only fair that the assets stay with the creator. I am the reason we are rich." I picked up my pen, twirling it slowly between my fingers. "Built it from the ground up," I repeated, allowing a small, ice-cold smile to touch my lips. "Just like you built your very first portfolio using my entire salary to cover our rent, While you failed the required licensing exams, twice I funded your dream, Marcus. Do not ever confuse your current arrogance with actual competence. You stand on the foundation I poured. His jaw tightened, a flash of genuine anger crossing his perfectly groomed face. The reminder of his early failures always struck a nerve. Sign the paper, Simone. He snapped, his voice losing its playful, mocking edge. I signed the asset forfeiture documents without a single moment of hesitation. Then I pulled one final heavily worded sheet of paper from my portfolio and slid it across the table toward him. What is this? Marcus asked, suspiciously eyeing the document. It is a blanket indemnification and hold harmless agreement. I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. Since you are demanding 100% of the firm and all the properties, this simply states that you also assume 100% of any past, present, or future liabilities attached to those assets. It legally absolves me of any debts, liens, or legal actions related to Blackwood Financial and the real estate. It just protects me from your business risks. Marcus rolled his eyes, snatching the paper from the table. Always the paranoid accountant. Fine. If it gets you out of my hair and out of my bank accounts, I will sign your little safety net. He scribbled his signature across the bottom line, tossing the pen aside, completely blind to the reality of what he was doing. He thought he was securing his vast fortune and outsmarting his ex-wife. He had absolutely no idea that he had just wrapped a legal noose around his own neck and willingly handed me the other end of the rope. The mediator collected the forms, stamping them with the official seal of the court. The ink dried, finalizing the separation of our lives. Marcus immediately stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of absolute triumph. He did not look back at me, nor did he ask when he could say goodbye to Jamal and Jada. His mind was already calculating his next extravagant purchase. I remained seated, calmly packing my documents away. David shook his head in pure disbelief, mourning the financial loss he thought I had just suffered. But as I zipped my briefcase closed, the only thing I felt was profound, unshakable liberation. The heavy wooden doors of the mediation center clicked shut behind me. I stepped out into the brightly lit hallway, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. I expected to finally breathe, to feel the suffocating weight of a 10-year toxic marriage officially lift off my shoulders. Instead, I was immediately ambushed by the very people who had helped poison it from the beginning. Waiting in the lobby like a pack of impatient vultures was Marcus's family. His mother, Vivian, sat directly in the center of a velvet sofa, dressed in an immaculate designer knit suit, clutching a luxury handbag like it was a royal shield. Vivian was a woman entirely obsessed with optics and status. She practically lived at her exclusive country club and spent every single Sunday making sure everyone at their mega church knew exactly how much money her son was bringing in. She had always viewed me as a threat to her social climbing, constantly reminding me that my hard-working blue-collar parents from the south side of Chicago lacked the prestige required to merge with the so-called Blackwood legacy. Standing next to Vivian was Keisha, Marcus's younger sister. Keisha was 32 years old, had never worked a day in her life, but proudly carried the title of local socialite, spending her brother's money on lavish brunches and cosmetic procedures. And hovering right behind Keisha was her husband, Brad. Brad was a 35-year-old white man who made a living as a cryptocurrency broker. He had married into the family 3 years ago and immediately adopted a sickeningly superior attitude. He constantly leached off Marcus's business connections to fund his own volatile investments, while simultaneously talking down to everyone around him. Brad particularly loved talking down to the women of color in the family, operating under the bizarre delusion that his mere presence elevated our financial literacy. As I approached the elevator banks, Vivian stood up, intentionally blocking my path to the exit. Her eyes raked over my simple, tailored pantsuit with absolute undisguised disdain. "Well," Vivian said, her voice loud enough for the receptionist and several passing lawyers to hear, "I hope you are highly satisfied with yourself, Simone. You tried your absolute hardest to drag a high-value black man down to your level, but the cream always rises to the top. The Blackwood legacy will not be compromised by a girl from the projects who does not understand how elite wealth works. You simply could not keep up with his greatness." I stopped, looking at her composed, heavily powdered face. Vivian, I said evenly, your son just willingly signed away his own children to save his bank accounts. If that is what you consider elite wealth and greatness, you can absolutely keep it. Keisha stepped forward, crossing her arms defensively, her expensive bracelets clinking together. Do not talk to my mother like that. Marcus is just protecting the family assets from someone who clearly only married him for his money. You should be down on your knees feeling grateful that he is letting you walk away without suing you for spousal support to cover the damage you caused his peace of mind. Before I could respond to Keisha's ridiculous accusation, Brad stepped directly into my personal space. He smelled of cheap, overpowering cologne and expensive espresso. He flashed a condescending, pitying smile that instantly made my skin crawl. Listen, Simone, Brad said, lowering his voice to a patronizing hum. Finance is a shark's game. It takes a certain level of aggressive intellect to navigate the markets and build an empire. A public sector accountant like you pushing papers for the government on a fixed salary, you just could not possibly understand Marcus's million-dollar vision. It is just over your head, and that is okay. But hey, no hard feelings. Let me know if you ever need to borrow my old Honda to get to work next week. We know things are going to be really tight for you now that you are cut off from the gravy train. He chuckled, looking back at Keisha and Vivian for their approval. They both smirked completely and entirely united in their shared delusion. For 10 long years I had bitten my tongue. For 10 years I had smiled politely while this specific group of people insulted my background, belittled my parents, and mocked my career in public service. But today, standing in that lobby with the signed indemnification agreement safely tucked inside my briefcase, I felt nothing but a deep, chilling calm. Keep your Honda, Brad, I said softly, looking him dead in the eye without blinking. You are going to need it a lot more than I will very, very soon. I did not wait for his response. I simply walked past them, stepped into the open elevator, and pressed the button for the ground floor, leaving them standing in the lobby, looking confused. When I walked out into the warm Atlanta afternoon, the heavy humidity immediately hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk just in time to see Marcus strutting out of the building's VIP exit. He was practically skipping with joy. A brand new gleaming silver Porsche pulled up to the curb. In the passenger seat sat a stunning 24-year-old woman with long extensions and oversized designer sunglasses. Marcus had formally introduced her to our social circle as his new executive assistant, but everyone, including me, knew exactly what her real role was. Marcus opened the driver's side door but paused when he saw me standing alone on the corner. He threw his head back and laughed loudly, pointing at me before leaning in to passionately kiss the young woman. He got into the car, revved the engine obnoxiously loud to ensure I was watching, and sped off down Peachtree Street, leaving me behind in a cloud of exhaust. I watched the silver car disappear into the heavy city traffic. No tears came to my eyes. There was no sense of loss or heartbreak. There was just an overwhelming electric surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I bypassed the standard text messages from my worried friends and opened a highly encrypted application that required a retinal biometric scan to unlock. The screen turned black, then flashed bright green. A single message sat in the secure inbox sent directly from a top-tier federal server in Washington, D.C. Audit complete. All shell companies identified. Warrants ready for your final review. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. What Marcus, Vivian, Keisha, and Brad did not know was that I was not a low-level paper-pushing public accountant. For the past 6 years, I had been working deep undercover as a senior forensic investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission, specializing in high-level corporate fraud, money laundering, and financial crimes. And my latest federal target had been sitting across from me at the dinner table for months. I typed a swift single-word reply to my director. Proceed. I locked my phone, adjusted the strap of my briefcase over my shoulder, and walked calmly toward the train station. Marcus thought he had just won the world. He had no idea he had just stepped onto a federal landmine, and I was the one holding the detonator. The tires of my modest rental SUV crunched against the pristine gravel of the circular driveway leading up to the $4 million Buckhead mansion. This was the house I had picked out. The house I had spent countless nights meticulously organizing, painting, and turning into a home for my children. Now it was just another asset I had legally severed myself from. I pulled up and parked next to a glaringly obnoxious lime green sports car that could only belong to Brad. My stomach tightened. Marcus was supposed to be out of town celebrating his so-called victory with his new assistant, which meant he had given his sister and brother-in-law unrestricted access to the property before I even had the chance to pack the last of my belongings. I told Jamal and Jada to stay in the car with their iPads and locked the doors, promising I would only be a few minutes. The heavy mahogany double doors were propped wide open, letting the stifling Atlanta humidity seep into the climate-controlled foyer. I walked inside to the sound of loud grating laughter echoing from the main living room. Keisha and Brad were standing in the center of the sunken living area, holding a laser measuring tape and pointing at the custom built-in bookshelves I had commissioned 3 years ago. Keisha was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, sipping a mimosa from one of my crystal flutes. Brad was tapping frantically on his latest tablet, wearing a crypto startup polo shirt that looked entirely out of place in the elegant space. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Keisha barked at a moving crew worker who was carrying a stack of my winter coats. I said all of her trash goes straight to the garage, not the guest room. Marcus wants this entire wing cleared out by tonight so the interior decorators can start the demolition. I stepped down into the living room, my presence instantly freezing the room. The moving worker quickly scurried past me, looking apologetic. "You are measuring for a remodel before the ink on the divorce decree is even dry," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I have until 5 o'clock today to vacate the premises according to the legal agreement your brother signed." Keisha rolled her eyes, taking a dramatic sip of her mimosa. "Marcus owns this house now, Simone. He generously allowed you to come collect your little accountant outfits, but we are managing the property upgrade. Brad is overseeing the new layout. We are turning this depressing study into a crypto trading floor for Marcus's new platinum fund partners. You really lacked vision for this kind of square footage anyway." Brad did not even look up from his tablet. He just let out a breathy, condescending chuckle. "Keisha is right, Simone. The old decor was very safe, very public sector. Marcus is swimming with the big fish now. He needs a space that screams aggressive capital, not suburban soccer mom. Do not worry, we told the movers to put your boxes of boring textbooks by the garbage cans where they belong." Before I could respond, Keisha walked over to a stack of boxes I had carefully packed the night before. These were the boxes containing my college textbooks, my advanced forensic accounting manuals, and personal keepsakes from my days at Howard University. Without warning, she shoved the top box hard. It toppled over, spilling heavy textbooks and binders out the open front doors and directly onto the hard concrete of the front porch. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air. I walked slowly toward the spilled contents. Lying face up on the concrete under a heavy statistics textbook was a framed photograph from my first year of marriage. The glass had completely shattered, slicing through the image of Marcus and me standing in front of a tiny, run-down apartment building. I crouched down and picked up the broken frame, carefully brushing the sharp shards of glass off the photo. Keisha followed me to the doorway, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me. "Oops," she said, her tone devoid of any actual apology. "Guess you should have packed your memories a little more securely. Then again, you should probably just leave that in the trash. Marcus has entirely upgraded his life. You are just a bitter reminder of when he was poor." I stood up slowly, clutching the broken frame. I looked at the marble floors of the foyer, then up at the soaring ceiling with its custom lighting fixtures. I looked at Keisha, whose entire lifestyle was funded by her brother's supposed genius. And then at Brad, who was practically salivating over the chance to leech off Marcus's new wealth. "Careful, Keisha," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "You are standing on the imported marble floors that I paid the mortgage for, every single month for 3 straight years." While Marcus was claiming consecutive startup losses on his taxes, while he failed his Series 7 licensing exam, twice my steady, boring public sector salary kept the lights on in this exact house. I funded the illusion of his success until he could find enough naive investors to believe it was real. So be very careful how you treat the woman who literally built the ground you are standing on. Brad let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, walking over to wrap his arm around his wife. Wow. Listen to you, he sneered, shaking his head. You really are just bitter, aren't you? It kills you to see a black man succeed beyond your limited conservative comprehension. You are projecting your own financial insecurities onto him. Marcus is a financial visionary. He manifested this empire. You are just upset because you got left behind at the station while the wealth train took off. Just take your broken little picture and go, Simone. We have contractors arriving in 20 minutes to tear out this outdated flooring anyway. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at them, two fools eagerly fighting for a front row seat on a sinking ship. I gathered my textbooks, placed them neatly into the trunk of my SUV, and closed the door. I got into the driver's seat, glancing at Jamal and Jada in the rearview mirror. They were happily oblivious, wearing their headphones and watching cartoons. As I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the Buckhead mansion for the very last time, a secured notification illuminated my phone screen. I pulled over to the side of the tree-lined street to read it. The alert was directly from my automated federal tracking software, pinging a major change in Marcus's financial profile. Marcus had just executed a massive high-interest secondary mortgage against the Buckhead mansion. He had leveraged the entire $4 million property to the absolute maximum limit, pulling out liquid cash to aggressively fund a brand new investment tier for his firm. The terms of the loan were incredibly predatory, the kind of desperate toxic debt a man only takes on when he is scrambling to pay off angry early investors with new money. He was doubling down on the Ponzi scheme, using the very house he just fought to keep as his collateral. If the firm collapsed, the bank would immediately seize the mansion. I read the alert twice to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as I put the car back in gear. Brad and Keisha were currently measuring for a remodel on a house that Marcus had just mortgaged straight to hell. The noose was tightening faster than I had even anticipated, and they were all happily placing their necks right inside it. Sunday morning arrived with the suffocating heat typical of an Atlanta summer, matched only by the suffocating hypocrisy of Greater Grace Cathedral. This was not just a church. It was a runway, a country club, and a networking event all rolled into one massive stained glass arena. For years I had walked through those gilded double doors as the dutiful, quiet wife of Marcus Blackwood, wearing the conservative, muted dresses his mother deemed appropriate for my station. Today, I parked my modest SUV between two towering luxury vehicles, unbuckled my twins, and walked into the grand sanctuary wearing a striking tailored crimson pantsuit that I had purchased with my own heavily scrutinized paycheck. The head usher, Brother Thomas, blocked my usual path down the plush center aisle. He looked down at his patent leather shoes, clearly uncomfortable with the task he had been given. Sister Vivian requested the family pew be reserved strictly for the primary donors this morning, he mumbled, gesturing vaguely toward the overflow seating in the back near the soundboard. I followed his gaze to the very front of the sanctuary. There sat Marcus, wrapped in a bespoke navy suit, openly holding hands with his 24-year-old mistress right in the house of the Lord. She was wearing a wide-brimmed fascinator hat that cost more than my first vehicle. Next to them sat Vivian, beaming with absolute radiant pride, completely unbothered by the sheer blasphemy of parading her son's adulterous partner in front of the entire congregation. I did not cause a scene. I simply thanked Brother Thomas, guided Jamal and Jada to the back row, and helped them open their coloring books. As the massive choir began their opening hymn, their voices shaking the floorboards, I stepped out into the opulent marble lobby to get a cup of water from the fountain. Vivian was already waiting by the grand staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her tailored tweed jacket. She looked me up and down, her lips pursed in deep, familiar disapproval. "I see you decided to actually show your face today," Vivian whispered, her voice dripping with venomous southern malice. "I would have thought you had the common decency to find a different congregation given the total humiliation you brought upon yourself. But then again, people from your side of town never did understand the concept of shame. You just cling to where you do not belong." I took a slow sip from my paper cup, looking directly into her perfectly lined eyes. There is absolutely no shame in securing peace for my children, Vivian. The only thing embarrassing in this entire building is watching a so-called devout Christian woman sit next to her son's heavily Botoxed mistress during Sunday service just because he pays your bills. Vivian scoffed, taking a step closer, pointing a French manicured finger directly at my chest. That woman understands my son. Marcus is finally fulfilling his destiny to build true generational wealth. He is securing the elite Blackwood legacy. He could never do that with a small-minded, fearful woman holding him back. You always wanted him to play it safe, to think small, to act like a common laborer, because that is all you know. Now that he has finally cut off the dead weight, he is soaring. Look at him, Simone. He is a king in this city. He is building an empire. I smiled gently, leaning in just enough so only she could hear the absolute certainty in my voice. A king ruling over a castle made of sand, Vivian. Be careful. The tide comes in fast and it washes away everything that is not anchored to the truth. I walked back into the sanctuary, just as Pastor Higgins took the pulpit. It was time for the tithe, the most highly anticipated theatrical portion of the Greater Grace service. The prosperity gospel was preached heavily here, and Marcus was currently their star pupil. Pastor Higgins cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses and gripping the microphone. Before we passed the plates this morning, the pastor boomed, his voice echoing through the massive sound system. I want to take a special moment to thank a man who truly understands the biblical principle of sowing into the kingdom. Brother Marcus Blackwood has just pledged a staggering $50,000 donation to our new youth center expansion project. The entire congregation erupted into thunderous standing applause. Marcus stood up slowly, buttoning his custom jacket, waving to the crowd with the false humility of a seasoned politician. His mistress clapped excitedly beside him, practically bouncing on her expensive heels. Vivian looked as though she might ascend straight to heaven right then and there. Marcus turned slowly, scanning the sea of faces until his eyes found mine all the way in the back row. He flashed a brilliant, victorious smile, lifting his chin. He wanted to crush me. He wanted me to feel the suffocating weight of his financial superiority, to know that he could casually drop my annual public sector salary into an offering plate purely for the applause. He had absolutely no idea that every single dollar he just donated was effectively stolen from the retirement accounts of the very people clapping for him. The heavy brass collection plates began their journey down the long aisles, passing from hand to manicured hand. The ushers moved systematically, collecting cash checks and digital giving envelopes. I sat quietly, watching the grotesque display of blind faith and aggressive pride unfolding at the front of the room. When the brass plate finally reached my row at the very back of the church, I did not pass it by. I reached into my leather purse and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I dropped it into the velvet-lined plate. It made no sound, but to me it was the loudest drop of the entire morning. Inside that envelope was not a check. It was not cash. It was a printed, publicly available warning directly from the Securities and Exchange Commission database. The document explicitly detailed the severe federal penalties for operating an unregistered securities offering and engaging in predatory secondary mortgage lending without a license. I had taken a red pen and highlighted the specific federal statutes Marcus was currently violating, statutes that carried mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison. I knew the church financial administrators counted the tithes immediately after the service in the back offices. I knew they would open that envelope expecting a donation. I knew the head of the church finance committee, a highly conservative banker who absolutely despised unnecessary liability, would read that federal warning and immediately question the legitimate source of Marcus's massive $50,000 pledge. The seeds of intense legal doubt would spread through the entire church board by Monday morning. I looked up at Marcus one last time. He was still smiling, still basking in the blinding glow of his fabricated excellence. I smiled back, gathering my children to leave before the final prayer. His wealth was a complete illusion, a fragile house of cards propped up by toxic debt, blatant deceit, and the quiet desperation of his investors. The structural integrity of his life was already failing rapidly, and I was quietly, methodically pulling out the bottom cards. Monday morning felt entirely different than any morning I had experienced in the last decade. I traded my Sunday crimson pantsuit for a sharp, tailored charcoal blazer, bypassing the glittering financial district entirely. Instead, I drove my modest SUV to an unassuming concrete building nestled in an industrial park on the outskirts of Atlanta. There were no valet stands here, no marble fountains, and absolutely no country club memberships required for entry. There was only a reinforced steel door and a biometric retinal scanner. I stared into the green light, waited for the heavy click of the deadbolt, and stepped into the regional field office of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I walked past rows of specialized analysts tracking international wire transfers and forensic accountants dissecting offshore shell corporations. My low heels clicked rhythmically against the dull linoleum floor, a stark and welcome contrast to the imported Italian marble my former in-laws were currently tearing up. I pushed open the heavy frosted glass door to the primary briefing room. Director Vance was already sitting at the head of the long conference table. He was a ruthless, seasoned federal prosecutor who had spent 30 years putting corrupt billionaires and hedge fund managers behind bars. He did not care about designer watches, custom suits, or VIP bottle service. He cared strictly about paper trails. Vance looked up as I dropped a massive red classified folder onto the center of the table. "Have a seat, Simone," he said, pulling his reading glasses down from his forehead. "Tell me you finally have the last piece of the puzzle." I unzipped my leather portfolio, the exact same one I had confidently carried into my divorce mediation just days prior. "I have absolutely everything," I replied, sliding a thick stack of highlighted bank statements and internal ledgers across the long table. Marcus Blackwood is not running a prestigious wealth management firm. He is operating a $25 million Ponzi scheme. He has not made a single legitimate market trade in over 3 years. Vance picked up the first page, his eyes swiftly scanning the highlighted routing numbers and offshore account details. "Talk me through the exact mechanics, Simone. How is he keeping the lights on and the investors quiet for this long?" "It is a classic aggressively structured churn," I explained, tapping a complex flowchart I had manually drafted over the weekend. "He deliberately targets high net worth individuals in our local social circles. He goes after country club members, megachurch donors, and local athletes looking for exclusive private equity portfolios. He promises them an absurd guaranteed return of 18% annually on his so-called elite platinum tier investments. But there is no platinum tier. There is no investment portfolio. The money goes straight from their pockets into a master offshore holding account hidden under a shell company. When his older investors ask for a quarterly payout, he uses the fresh capital he just collected from his newest younger investors to cover the withdrawal. The rest of the cash goes directly to funding his fleet of luxury cars, Vivian's exorbitant country club dues, and Brad's catastrophic cryptocurrency losses." Vance flipped to the next page, shaking his head in absolute disgust. $25 million in entirely fabricated wealth. The pure hubris on this guy is staggering. How long did it take you to spot the structural fractures in his business? I leaned forward, clasping my hands tightly on the table. 14 months ago, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Marcus made the fatal, arrogant mistake of assuming my government accounting job was just low-level busy work. He genuinely thought I was simply balancing boring budgets for the public sector. He completely ignored the fact that my daily job description involves dismantling corporate financial fraud. When tax season rolled around last year, he carelessly tossed his business ledgers onto my desk and told me to file our joint returns. He told me to just make the numbers work and not ask questions. I watched Vance's eyes widen slightly as he leaned back. "He handed you the murder weapon." "Exactly," I said, allowing a cold, calculated smile to touch my lips. I stayed up until 4 in the morning cross-referencing his reported gains against our actual bank deposits. Absolutely nothing matched. He was claiming millions in capital gains, but the tax documents from his brokerage accounts were completely missing. When I dug deeper into the metadata of his digital files, I found obvious digital alterations. He was literally photoshopping his quarterly earnings statements to appease his clients. That was the exact night I realized my husband was not a financial genius. He was a sophisticated, desperate thief. "So why stay?" Vance asked, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "You could have walked away the very next morning. Why endure another year of a deeply toxic marriage? Because walking away immediately would have triggered a federal asset freeze while I was still legally tied to him," I stated firmly. "If the SEC raided Blackwood Financial 14 months ago, my name would have been legally attached to those joint accounts. The federal government would have seized our home, frozen my personal savings, and dragged my children into a massive, humiliating media circus. I needed time. I needed to meticulously untangle my personal finances from his absolute mess. I needed to build an airtight federal case against him from the inside, gathering illicit wire transfers and hidden offshore account numbers while he was busy sleeping with his assistant and ignoring his family. I stayed just long enough to ensure my children would never have to pay for his crimes." Vance tapped his pen against the table, a sharp, calculating look in his eye. "That brings us to the most critical issue, Simone. As his wife, you are still legally exposed. If we raid his firm today, the furious victims are going to sue everyone attached to the Blackwood name. They will come after your public sector pension. They will come after any alimony he pays you. They will try to claw back every single dime you have to cover their devastating losses." I reached back into my portfolio. "That is precisely why I walked into divorce mediation on Friday and willingly surrendered every single marital asset," I said, sliding a single officially stamped piece of paper across the table. "I gave him the $4 million house. I gave him the luxury cars. I gave him 100% of the fraudulent firm. And I completely waived my right to any future child support." Vance looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. "You waived child support for a man allegedly running a $25 million fund. Read the bottom clause," I instructed, pointing a manicured finger to the heavily worded paragraph right above Marcus's hurried, arrogant signature. Vance picked up the official paper, reading the legal jargon aloud. "In exchange for the complete surrender of all marital assets, the respondent Marcus Blackwood assumes 100% of any past, present, or future liabilities, debts, liens, civil actions, and federal penalties associated with Blackwood Financial and all acquired real estate. The petitioner is hereby fully indemnified and held harmless in perpetuity." Vance stopped reading. The silence in the secure briefing room was absolutely deafening. He looked at the official stamp, then looked up at me, a slow, profound realization dawning on his weathered face. "He signed this?" Vance asked, his voice hushed with total disbelief. "He willingly signed a federal indemnification clause during a standard divorce mediation. He thought he was securing his vast empire and leaving me totally penniless," I replied, my voice hard and absolute. "He was so incredibly eager to keep his dirty money that he blindly ignored the legal reality of what he was absorbing. By signing that document, Marcus formally accepted sole legal and financial responsibility for the entire $25 million fraud. He severed me from the blast radius. When the federal court orders him to pay massive restitution to all those mega-church donors and country club friends, they cannot touch a single penny of my salary. My children and I are legally bulletproof." Vance stared at the signature for a long moment before setting the document down. He let out a sharp, genuine laugh, shaking his head. "He really thought you were just a bitter, small-minded woman holding him back. He vastly underestimated his accountant," I said softly. Vance closed the red classified folder, resting his hands heavily on top of it. He looked me dead in the eye, all traces of amusement gone, replaced entirely by the cold, highly calculated focus of a federal director ready to drop the hammer. "Your personal liability is zero. The financial evidence is irrefutable. The offshore shell companies are completely locked," Vance stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "The search warrants are signed by the federal judge. You have kept your family safe, Simone." I stood up from the conference table, smoothing out my charcoal blazer, feeling the final heavy chains of my past life fall completely away. Vance nodded sharply toward the door. "Give the green light to the tactical teams. Take him down." The ink on the federal raid authorization was barely dry, but I had one final deeply personal errand to run before the SEC tactical teams descended on Blackwood Financial. Marcus was the architect of his own destruction, but his arrogant brother-in-law, Brad, required a special kind of trap. I knew exactly how to spring it. Brad operated under the fatal delusion that he was the smartest man in every room, especially if that room contained a woman he could talk down to. All I had to do was give him the opportunity to prove me wrong, and he would gleefully march straight off a financial cliff. I parked my modest SUV down the street from an aggressively modern, overpriced coffee shop in Midtown. It was the exact spot Brad used as his unofficial office to pitch his highly volatile crypto strategies to anyone who would listen. I adjusted my posture, letting my shoulders slump just a fraction. I softened my expression, replacing my usual sharp focus with the wide, anxious eyes of a desperate ex-wife who was in way over her head. I took a deep breath, pushing open the heavy glass door. Brad was sitting in a velvet booth near the back, two laptops open in front of him, loudly ordering a barista to remake his pour-over coffee. I walked over, clutching my leather purse tightly to my chest, letting a perfectly calculated look of hesitation wash over my face. "Brad," I said, making my voice shake just a little. "Do you have a minute?" He looked up, annoyance flashing across his face before settling into that familiar, sickeningly smug grin. "Well, look who it is," he mocked, leaning back and resting his arms on the velvet cushions. "If it is not the woman who walked away from millions." "What do you want, Simone? Did you realize? A government pension barely covers groceries these days. I told you my old Honda is still available." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look incredibly vulnerable. "I do not want anything for myself, Brad. I came here because I am genuinely terrified for Keisha. You have to listen to me." Brad let out a loud, harsh bark of laughter, drawing the attention of several people at neighboring tables. "Terrified for Keisha. That is rich. Keisha is wearing shoes that cost more than your monthly rent. She is doing just fine without your unsolicited concern." I stepped closer to his table, leaning down so I could whisper frantically, "Brad, please." When I was packing up my office at the house, I saw some of Marcus's internal ledgers. Things are not what they seem. He is bleeding cash. I know he is pitching this new platinum tier fund to his inner circle, but you cannot put your money into it. He is struggling to maintain liquidity. If you invest Keisha's trust fund, you are going to lose everything. I am begging you, as someone who knows his spending habits, keep your assets far away from Blackwood Financial. I watched the bait dangle right in front of his face. I knew the exact buttons to push. Tell an arrogant contrarian that something is dangerous, and he will sprint toward it just to prove he is fearless. Tell a man like Brad that a woman of color knows more about finance than he does, and he will bankrupt himself just to put her in her place. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare of absolute superiority. He slowly closed his nearest laptop, giving me his full, undivided, condescending attention. "You really have no idea how pathetic you sound right now, do you?" Brad sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "This is exactly why you will never be anything more than a glorified clerk, Simone. You are terrified of risk. Women like you, women from your specific background, are entirely too risk-averse to ever build real substantial wealth. You see a momentary cash flow fluctuation, and you panic. You think like a poverty-stricken employee, not an apex investor." I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from smiling. I let my eyes well up with fake desperate tears. "Brad, I am an accountant. I know what a liquidity crisis looks like. Marcus took out a high-interest secondary mortgage on the Buckhead house yesterday. Why would a billionaire need toxic debt to fund a new tier? Please just look at the numbers before you commit." Brad slammed his hand down on the table, making his expensive coffee cup rattle. "Do not ever try to lecture me on market liquidity." He snapped his face, turning an angry shade of red. "Marcus is leveraging his assets to maximize a massive return. It is called aggressive capital allocation. It is a high-level wealth strategy that is clearly way above your pay grade. The platinum tier is highly exclusive, and Marcus is doing us a massive favor by letting us buy in at the ground floor." I took a step back, wrapping my arms around myself, as if I were shrinking away from his harsh tone. "I am just trying to warn you," I whispered pathetically. "Save your warnings for someone who actually cares about your small-minded opinions." Brad spat back, completely drunk on his own perceived brilliance. "In fact, your little display of financial cowardice just confirmed everything I needed to know. I was going to wait until next quarter, but I am not missing out on this yield. I am moving $2 million of Keisha's family trust directly into Marcus's platinum tier first thing tomorrow morning. I am wiring the funds before the banks even open. Now do us all a favor and go back to your cubicle, Simone. Let the real players handle the money." I looked at him for one long, silent moment. I let him soak in his victory. I let him feel the absolute rush of putting his ex-sister-in-law firmly in her place. He was practically vibrating with the thrill of his own arrogance. "Okay, Brad," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to make sure you made an informed decision." I turned around and walked away from the velvet booth. I kept my head down, maintaining the posture of a defeated, humiliated woman, until I reached the heavy glass doors of the coffee shop. I stepped out into the blinding Atlanta sunlight and let the heavy glass door swing shut behind me. The second my heels hit the pavement, my entire demeanor shifted. My shoulders snapped back, my spine straightened. The anxious, trembling ex-wife vanished completely, replaced instantly by the senior forensic investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission. A sharp, genuine smile broke across my face, and I let out a low, victorious laugh. The trap had worked flawlessly. Brad was not just arrogant, he was dangerously stupid. By transferring $2 million of Keisha's family trust into Marcus's fraudulent account tomorrow morning, he was willingly throwing their entire financial safety net into a federal incinerator. Because the SEC raid was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the moment Brad's wire transfer cleared, those funds would be instantly frozen, seized by the federal government as part of a massive criminal investigation and locked in litigation for the next decade. Brad had just stubbornly, proudly, and aggressively doomed his own family to absolute financial ruin, all because his fragile ego could not handle a warning from a woman he deemed beneath him. I pulled my sunglasses out of my purse and slid them onto my face. I walked back to my modest SUV with a light, effortless step. The pieces were finally all in place. Marcus was drowning in toxic debt. Vivian was boasting to the entire congregation about a fabricated empire. And Brad had just confidently handed over his wife's trust fund to a federal target. I started the engine, pulling out into the city traffic. Tomorrow, the illusion would shatter completely. Tomorrow, the Blackwood legacy would be dragged out of their mansions and country clubs in federal handcuffs. And I was going to enjoy every single second of the fallout. The morning of the raid arrived with a suffocating heavy heat. I had exactly 6 hours before the federal tactical teams breached the glass doors of Blackwood Financial. But before the government froze every single asset tied to that corrupted family name, I had one final errand to run. Jada's great-grandmother had left her a vintage pearl necklace for her 16th birthday, and it was currently sitting in the wall safe of Vivian's historic family estate in Ansley Park. I needed to secure my daughter's heirloom before the federal padlocks went on the doors. I pulled my SUV up to the wrought iron gates of the property. The 80-year-old estate was the absolute crown jewel of the Blackwood generational wealth. Vivian's grandfather had built it from the ground up, a sprawling brick manor surrounded by ancient magnolia trees. Vivian treated the house like a royal palace, constantly reminding everyone that it was completely paid off, a testament to their elite financial standing. Today, the driveway was packed with luxury sedans and a private valet stand. Vivian was hosting a lavish midweek brunch for her elite sorority sisters. I could hear the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the loud, pretentious laughter echoing from the wraparound porch. I walked up the brick steps, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I did not come to cause a scene, I just wanted the necklace. I stepped onto the porch, immediately halting the chatter. 20 older women dressed in coordinated pastel linen suits turned to stare at me. Vivian was standing at the head of a long catered table holding a silver serving tongs. When she saw me, her fake gracious host smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, venomous glare. Simone Vivian announced loudly, ensuring every single woman on the porch was hanging on her every word. We are in the middle of an exclusive alumni gathering. I explicitly told Marcus to handle your leftover grievances. You have absolutely no right to trespass on my family property. I kept my voice calm and completely measured. I am not here for Marcus Vivian. I am here for Jada's pearl necklace, the one your mother left her in the trust. I want to collect it today. Vivian scoffed, slamming the silver tongs down onto the table. You are terrified, aren't you? You are scrambling to collect any little scrap of value because you finally realize you walked away with nothing. Well, I will have the housekeeper fetch your little trinket. But while you are here, you might as well hear the good news directly from me. She turned to her captivated audience of sorority sisters, her chest puffed out with absolute arrogance. My son is expanding his wealth management firm into a global tier today, she proclaimed, her voice ringing across the manicured lawn. He is opening a platinum investment fund that will solidify the Blackwood name in the financial history books. He is playing in the major leagues now, entirely unburdened by the small-minded, fearful woman who spent 10 years trying to hold him back. The women murmured in agreement, casting pitying, condescending glances in my direction. I stood perfectly still, letting her dig the hole deeper. It takes money to make money, Simone Vivian continued, walking slowly toward me with a smug, victorious grin. It takes bold, aggressive vision to build an empire. That is something your working-class parents never understood. They taught you to hoard pennies and fear risk. But true generational wealth requires absolute, fearless commitment. And I believe in my son's genius so completely that I am personally backing his new venture. I frowned slightly, a genuine spark of confusion cutting through my federal investigator mindset. Backing him how, Vivian? Your liquid assets are tied up in the church expansion fund. Vivian laughed, a sharp, arrogant sound that grated against my ears. I leveraged the estate, she declared, proudly gesturing grandly to the 80-year-old brick mansion behind her. I took out a maximum capacity reverse mortgage on the family home this morning. I handed Marcus the entire sum to inject directly into the Platinum Fund. Within 6 months, his returns will pay the house off twice over. That is how real legacy operates, Simone. We leverage our power to create unstoppable momentum. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at her, genuinely horrified by the sheer magnitude of her financial suicide. Vivian had not just risked her savings account, she had literally bet the 80-year-old fully paid-off cornerstone of their entire family legacy on a $25 million Ponzi scheme. She had handed the deed of her grandfather's estate to the bank to fund Marcus's fake investments. When the SEC raided his office in a few hours and froze his accounts, Marcus would default on that massive reverse mortgage immediately. The bank would seize the Ansley Park estate by the end of the month. Vivian had just willingly, proudly rendered herself entirely homeless. A fleeting, irrational wave of pity washed over me. I looked at this proud, nasty woman surrounded by her wealthy friends, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a trapdoor that was about to swing wide open. Vivian? I said, my voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. I am telling you this once. Call your bank right now. Cancel that reverse mortgage. Read Marcus's prospectus carefully. Read the fine print on the liquidity disclosures. His numbers do not add up. If you give him the equity from this house, you are going to lose it permanently. Vivian's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. How dare you, she hissed, stepping so close I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. How dare you stand on my property and insult my son's financial genius? You are just drowning in bitter, pathetic jealousy. You cannot stand the fact that he is becoming a titan without you. You want to see him fail so badly that you would stand here and try to poison his own mother against him. She signaled sharply to a burly private security guard standing near the front gate. Escort this woman off my property immediately, Vivian ordered, her voice echoing loudly across the porch. And mail her the damn necklace. I do not ever want to see her pathetic, poverty-stricken face near my legacy ever again. The security guard took a step toward me, but I raised my hand, stopping him in his tracks. I did not need to be escorted. I had done what I came to do. I had offered her the one and only lifeline she was ever going to get, and she had slapped it away with aggressive pride. I turned my back on Vivian and her audience of wealthy friends. I walked down the brick steps and back to my SUV, feeling the heavy, humid air press against my skin. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors, dropping the distressed pleading act the second I turned the key in the ignition. I pulled out of the circular driveway and merged onto the main road, leaving the Ansley Park estate in my rearview mirror. My trap had worked flawlessly on Brad, and now Vivian had built her own financial guillotine. The ruin of the Blackwood family was no longer just a federal takedown. It was a complete systematic self-destruction of their own making. I picked up my phone and dialed Director Vance. "The targets are locked," I said clearly. "Bring the whole house down." The federal gears of justice grind with deliberate, silent precision. While Director Vance mobilized his tactical teams over the next 48 hours, my immediate focus had to shift back to the only two people in the world who actually mattered. Saturday marked Jamal and Jada's 7th birthday. Despite the absolute chaos brewing in the background of my life, I was determined to give them a day of pure, uninterrupted joy. I had rented a beautiful shaded pavilion at Piedmont Park. I spent the entire morning stringing up bright balloons, decorating the picnic tables with their favorite superhero tablecloths, and setting out the 3 dozen cupcakes I had baked from scratch the night before. During our divorce mediation, Marcus had grandstanded in front of the lawyers, loudly insisting that he would handle the primary entertainment and the food. He promised the children a massive, 3-story bounce house and a fully catered gourmet taco truck. He wanted to play the role of the wealthy, superior provider in front of the other school parents. I had reluctantly agreed, stepping back to let him have his moment. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the pavilion was buzzing with excited 7-year-olds and their parents. The gifts were piled high on the table. The sun was shining, but the large patch of grass designated for the bounce house remained completely empty. There was no taco truck in the parking lot. There was no Marcus. By 1:30, the awkward whispers among the other mothers began. I smiled politely, offering apologies and handing out juice boxes while keeping a sharp eye on the parking lot entrance. Jamal and Jada kept running up to me, their big brown eyes scanning the park, asking when Daddy was going to arrive with the bouncy castle. Every time I had to tell them he was just running a little late, another piece of my heart fractured for them. At 1:45, I stepped behind a massive oak tree, shielding myself from the chatter of the party guests, and pulled out my phone. I dialed Marcus's private number. It rang 5 times before he finally picked up. The background noise hit my ear instantly. The aggressive thumping of a bass-heavy sound system, the loud shrieks of women laughing, and the unmistakable roar of a heavy boat engine cutting through open water. "Simone, what do you want?" Marcus slurred loudly, his voice thick with alcohol and dripping with sheer annoyance. "I am in the middle of a critical client emergency right now. Do not start nagging me." "A client emergency," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet so the other parents would not hear. "You are on a yacht, Marcus. Your 7-year-old children are standing in a public park, waiting for the bounce house and the caterer you explicitly promised to bring. They are looking for their father." Marcus let out a harsh, dismissive groan. "Oh, for God's sake, Simone, stop being so intensely dramatic. They are kids. They do not care. I am locking down a major offshore investor for the platinum tier today. Do you honestly expect me to walk away from a $10 million capital injection to go watch a bunch of first graders jump inside a plastic castle? Just go buy them some cheap pizza with your little government paycheck. I will buy them matching sports cars when they turn 16. Tell them Daddy is building an empire." The line went completely dead. He hung up on me. I stood frozen against the bark of the oak tree, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He did not care. He had never cared. His children were just props in his grand narrative, easily discarded the moment a better opportunity presented itself. My phone buzzed in my hand with an incoming email notification. I glanced down, hoping perhaps Vivian had decided to show up. Instead, it was an automated alert from a generic big-box toy store. Brad and Keisha had sent a digital gift card. I opened the email to see the amount. $25. The attached note simply read, "Happy birthday, kids. Hope it is fun. Brad and Keisha." It was a deliberate, calculated insult. Brad had just transferred $2 million of Keisha's family trust into Marcus's fraudulent account 2 days ago. They were currently flying first class to a private island for the weekend, yet they could only spare $25 digital for their niece and nephew's birthday. The sheer suffocating disrespect was palpable. I took a deep, steadying breath, burying my anger deep down where it could fuel my resolve, and walked back to the pavilion. Jamal and Jada were sitting alone at the edge of the picnic table. Jada was quietly crying, tears tracking down her cheeks, ruining the small superhero face paint she had proudly requested earlier. Jamal was trying desperately to look brave, but his lower lip was quivering. They knew. They understood that they had been abandoned again. I dropped to my knees right in front of them, completely ignoring the grass stains on my jeans. I pulled them both into a fierce, tight embrace. I wiped Jada's tears with my thumbs and kissed Jamal's forehead. "Listen to me, my beautiful babies," I said softly, making sure they looked directly into my eyes. "Your father is missing out on the best party in the entire world today. That is his loss, not yours. You two are the most important, most valuable people in my life. You are loved beyond measure. We do not need a bounce house to have fun, and we certainly do not need anyone who does not want to be here. We are going to build a life on solid ground. I promise you that. I will never, ever let you fall." I stood up, clapping my hands together to get the attention of the party guests. "All right, everyone," I announced with a bright, genuine smile. "Change of plans. We are doing a classic park party. I am ordering 20 large pizzas from the best spot in town, and we are starting a massive game of freeze tag in 5 minutes." The kids erupted into cheers. The crisis was averted. The parents relaxed, stepping in to help organize the games. Within 30 minutes, the pizzas arrived, the music was playing from a portable speaker, and the twins were running across the grass shrieking with pure, unadulterated joy. They did not need Marcus's fabricated wealth. They just needed someone to actually show up for them. As the party began to wind down and the children sat in the grass eating their cupcakes, I walked over to a weathered wooden park bench at the edge of the pavilion. I opened my leather tote bag and pulled out my encrypted federal laptop. I set it on my lap, connected to the secure mobile hotspot, and logged into the Department of Justice regional server. Director Vance had uploaded the final batch of federal documents an hour ago. They were waiting for my final digital authorization as the lead forensic investigator. I opened the secure portal. The files stared back at me in stark black and white. Federal subpoena and asset freeze authorization. Target Marcus Blackwood. Federal subpoena and asset seizure authorization. Target Vivian Blackwood. Federal subpoena and account freeze authorization. Target Bradley Jenkins. I looked up from the screen, watching my children laugh as they chased a stray balloon across the park. They were safe. They were completely severed from the financial blast radius. I looked back down at the glowing screen. The grace period was absolutely over. I placed my finger on the trackpad. I moved the cursor over the bright green execution button. With one firm, decisive click, I approved the warrants. The trap was officially sprung. The bright green confirmation banner flashed across my encrypted screen, locking the federal mandates into the Department of Justice database. I closed the laptop, sliding it back into my leather tote bag. The children were still laughing, chasing a stray balloon across the sunlit grass, completely oblivious to the fact that their mother had just rewritten their entire future. I watched them run, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of closure. But the federal takedown was only the first phase of my master plan. Justice was the primary objective, but building an absolute, impenetrable fortress of generational wealth for Jamal and Jada was the ultimate goal. I needed to move with absolute precision before the public or the media even caught wind of the impending SEC raid. First thing, Monday morning hours before the tactical teams were scheduled to breach Blackwood Financial, I drove downtown. I bypassed the flashy glass-fronted skyscrapers where men like Marcus loved to show off, and parked beneath the sleek, ultra-modern offices of Harrison and Reed. They were an elite private wealth management firm that specialized in high-net-worth asset protection, aggressive acquisitions, and most importantly, absolute corporate anonymity. I was not meeting with a junior associate. I was sitting directly across from David Harrison, the senior partner, and a man who valued discretion above all else. David slid a thick stack of finalized incorporation documents across his polished mahogany desk. We had spent the last 2 weeks establishing a blind trust, feeding directly into a bulletproof multi-tiered, limited liability company registered in Delaware. The corporate structure was an absolute fortress, designed specifically to mask the true identity of the primary shareholder. I transferred the entirety of my aggressively saved, highly legal income from my federal career into the LLC's primary operating account. Over the past decade, while Marcus was loudly blowing his fraudulent cash on depreciating luxury cars, bespoke suits, and VIP nightclub tables to impress his equally fake friends, I had been quietly, ruthlessly hoarding my government salary performance bonuses and federal hazard pay. I lived well below my means, drove a sensible vehicle, and invested every spare dollar into high-yield, low-risk federal bonds. I had steadily built a perfectly clean, legally unassailable war chest. I stared at the blank signature line on the incorporation documents, a bitter memory rising to the surface of my mind. 5 years ago, Marcus had purchased his first major commercial strip mall. It was supposed to be a massive milestone for our family. I had reviewed the closing documents on our kitchen island and noticed my name was completely absent from the deed. When I confronted him about it, asking why his wife was not listed as a co-owner on a marital asset, he had laughed, patting my shoulder like a confused, anxious child. He claimed putting my name on commercial real estate simply complicated the tax structures. He fed me a patronizing, arrogant lecture about liability isolation and corporate risk, insisting that keeping my name off the paperwork was actually for my own financial protection. He told me I simply did not possess the financial literacy required to hold commercial titles. The truth was, he wanted to ensure I had absolutely no legal claim to the empire he was supposedly building. He wanted me entirely dependent on his fabricated success, a silent accessory to his grand illusion. I picked up the heavy gold-plated pen from David's desk and signed my name on the final line with absolute unwavering certainty. The ink dried, legally binding the anonymous LLC. I was no longer an unlisted dependent or an afterthought. I was the sole managing director of an elite acquisition firm holding millions in clean liquid capital. David gathered the documents, offering a sharp professional nod of approval. "The corporate veil is completely secure, Simone," he assured me, placing the file into a lockbox. "No one will ever be able to trace the purchasing entity back to you. You are completely invisible." "That is exactly how I need to operate," I replied, opening my portfolio. I pulled out a single heavily annotated sheet of paper and slid it across the mahogany desk. It was a printed list of 3 major commercial properties located in Atlanta's most lucrative industrial districts. They were massive, high-yield distribution centers that generated millions in annual rental revenue. Currently, the title deeds for all 3 properties were held exclusively by Blackwood Financial. They were the only legitimate hard assets Marcus had ever actually managed to acquire, serving as the physical crown jewels of his otherwise hollow empire. But Marcus was greedy. Because he had recently cross-collateralized those exact properties to illegally fund his fraudulent platinum-tier payouts, they were now heavily leveraged through aggressive commercial banking loans. The underlying financial architecture supporting those buildings was incredibly fragile, completely dependent on the continuous illegal flow of new investor capital to meet the monthly mortgage obligations. I knew exactly what was going to happen the second Director Vance's tactical teams kicked down the doors of Marcus's firm this afternoon. The SEC would instantly freeze all of Blackwood Financial's operating accounts, cutting off Marcus's entirely fake cash supply. Without the ability to move stolen funds, Marcus would immediately default on those massive commercial loans. Within 48 hours, the commercial bank holding the notes would panic. Banking executives despised being associated with federal fraud cases. They would move to seize the 3 properties instantly to protect their interests and throw them into a highly expedited commercial foreclosure auction to quickly recoup their toxic debt. The properties would be dumped onto the open market at absolute rock-bottom prices, drastically undervalued to guarantee a rapid, quiet sale. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the printed list, looking David directly in the eye. I instructed him to prep the LLC's capital for an immediate aggressive cash bid. My anonymous company was perfectly primed to sweep in and buy Marcus's entire commercial portfolio for absolute pennies on the dollar. I was going to legally acquire his only real assets, generating immense legitimate wealth for my children, and he would never even know it was me pulling the strings. While I sat on a weathered park bench, quietly dismantling Marcus's entire financial existence, he was busy preparing for his coronation across town. Marcus had rented out the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton for what he aggressively billed as a dual-purpose celebration. It was a massive, obscenely expensive divorce and rebranding gala. He invited over 400 of Atlanta's most elite socialites, politicians, and potential investors to witness his official transition from a married, mid-tier broker to a supposedly single platinum-tier wealth management titan. Upstairs in the penthouse presidential suite, Vivian was holding court. She sat in a velvet chair sipping vintage champagne while a team of high-end celebrity stylists worked on her hair and makeup. She was in her absolute element, treating the hired glam squad like a captive audience. "My son is finally shedding the dead weight that held him back for a decade," Vivian announced loudly to the makeup artist applying her contour. "This gala is his rebirth." Simone never understood the vision required to operate at this level. She was small-minded, always terrified of taking a real risk. But Marcus has the true Blackwood ambition. He just secured a massive offshore investor today, and his new platinum fund is going to make us billionaires by the end of the fiscal year. Sitting on the adjacent plush sofa, Keisha nodded eagerly in agreement. She and Brad had fully integrated themselves into Vivian's inner circle, treating Marcus's fake empire like their own personal piggy bank. Keisha was getting a custom updo, sipping her own glass of champagne, completely high on the illusion of generational wealth. "All right, ladies," the lead stylist said, stepping back and clapping his hands together. "You are both absolutely flawless. The total for the premium glam package is $4,200. Keisha smiled smugly, waving off Vivian's attempt to reach for her purse. "I have got this, Vivian," Keisha said, pulling a heavy metal platinum credit card from her clutch. "Brad and I are basically partners in Marcus's new venture now. Treat this as a celebration gift." The stylist took the card-attached a mobile reader to his tablet and swiped. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. The screen flashed a red error message. "That is strange," the stylist murmured, tapping the screen. "It says transaction declined. Let me try running it manually." He typed the numbers in. Another sharp beep. Declined. Keisha's confident smile faltered, her cheeks flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. Vivian stopped sipping her champagne, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows narrowing. "There must be a chip error." Keisha stammered, quickly digging into her purse. "Let me just use my backup card. It is linked to my family trust account. There is limitless capital in there." She handed over a second card. The stylist swiped it. The tablet flashed red again. Declined. The atmosphere in this penthouse suite instantly turned suffocatingly awkward. The stylists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Keisha's hands were visibly shaking as she stared at her wallet, completely unable to comprehend how a trust fund account could trigger a denial. At that exact moment, Brad walked into the suite, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. Keisha immediately stood up, marching over to him with a quiet, frantic energy. "Brad, my cards are declining," Keisha hissed, keeping her voice low so Vivian would not hear. "Both of them. Even the family trust card. What is going on?" Brad did not look concerned. He actually let out a condescending chuckle, adjusting his bow tie in the hallway mirror. "Relax, Keisha. It is just a bank glitch. I told you I executed the wire transfer for your $2 million trust fund directly into Marcus's platinum account this morning. When you move that kind of heavy capital, the bank's automated fraud algorithms automatically freeze the secondary debit cards for 48 hours as a security precaution. It is a completely standard procedure for high net worth investors." "Are you absolutely sure?" Keisha asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We do not have access to any liquid cash right now." Brad rolled his eyes, pulling a thick wad of $100 bills from his tuxedo pocket and tossing it onto the stylist's table. "Keep the change," he told the glam squad before turning back to his wife. "Stop acting like a panicked amateur Keisha. We just bought into a $25 million fund. By next month, the returns will be so massive we will not even look at price tags anymore. Just smile and get ready for the party." Keisha forced a smile, nodding along with her husband's arrogant logic. But a deep, uncomfortable knot of tension began to simmer beneath the surface. The seed of doubt had been planted even if she was too desperate for wealth to fully acknowledge it. Across the city, I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a cup of black coffee while the twins watched a movie in the living room. The federal warrants were actively moving through the tactical channels. The dominoes were falling in perfect silence. My phone vibrated on the marble counter. I glanced down expecting an update from Director Vance. Instead, it was an email notification. The subject line read, "You are invited, the Blackwood Rebranding Gala." I frowned opening the message. It was a digital invitation dripping with gold foil graphics and pretentious fonts. But it was the personalized note attached at the bottom that caught my attention. "Oops," the note read. "It looks like you are still on the old, outdated family contact list. But since the email already went through, you might as well see what real unstoppable success looks like without you dragging it down. Feel free to stop by if you want a glimpse of the platinum lifestyle. Best, Chantel." I stared at the screen. Chantel, Marcus's 24-year-old mistress, the woman he was actively parading around the Ritz-Carlton tonight as his new upgraded partner. She had intentionally sent me this invitation as a petty, vindictive attempt to rub my nose in their supposed triumph. She wanted me to sit at home drowning in jealousy while they toasted to their millions. She had absolutely no idea that she had just handed me a front-row ticket to their total annihilation. I checked my federal secure line. Director Vance had messaged me 2 minutes ago. The tactical breach at Blackwood Financial headquarters was scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock tonight. The asset freeze would hit the banking network simultaneously. By 9:15, Marcus's entire empire would be completely vaporized. The gala started at 8. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I had not planned on attending Marcus's ridiculous party. I had planned on watching the fallout from the safety of my home, but Chantel had practically rolled out the red carpet for me. She wanted me to witness Marcus's glorious rebirth. Instead, I was going to stand in the center of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom and watch the federal government strip him down to absolutely nothing. I tapped the screen. I selected the RSVP option. I clicked yes. I stood up from the kitchen island and walked toward my bedroom closet. I needed to find a dress suitable for a funeral because tonight the Blackwood legacy was going to die a very public, highly televised death. And I was going to be there to read the eulogy. The drive to the Ritz-Carlton took exactly 18 minutes, but it felt like a victory lap. The valet stand outside the grand entrance was a chaotic, glittering sea of imported sports cars, stretched limousines, and aggressive displays of new money. I handed the keys of my sensible, paid-off SUV to a valet attendant with a polite smile and walked through the towering glass doors of the luxury hotel. The heavy, suffocating scent of expensive floral arrangements and premium cologne hit me instantly. Marcus had not spared a single expense. Massive gold placards bearing the newly minted logo of Blackwood Platinum Wealth lined the marble hallways directing Atlanta's elite toward the grand ballroom. I stepped through the arched double doors and paused just inside the threshold, letting the sheer magnitude of the delusion wash over me. The room was absolutely dripping in gold and crystal. Towering champagne towers stood at each corner of the massive oak dance floor. Waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos circulated smoothly with silver trays of caviar oysters and imported truffles. A live string quartet played classical renditions of pop songs from a raised velvet-draped stage. It was a monument to financial excess, a glittering temple funded entirely by stolen money and shattered lives. Right in the center of the room, holding court like a conquering king, was Marcus. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue velvet dinner jacket, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand while gesturing grandly with the other. He was surrounded by a tight, desperate circle of local politicians, tech founders, and eager socialites, all begging for a piece of his supposedly unstoppable momentum. He threw his head back in a loud, booming laugh, playing the role of the ultimate self-made billionaire flawlessly. He looked completely invincible. He did not look invincible to me. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff wearing a blindfold. I took a slow, deliberate breath and stepped out of the shadows. I was not wearing my standard-issue conservative federal agency wool suit. Tonight I wore a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. It draped perfectly across my shoulders, falling in a sleek, fluid line down to the polished marble floor. It was powerful, elegant, and entirely unapologetic. I walked into the crowded ballroom with my head held high, letting the ambient chandelier light catch the subtle diamond drop earrings resting against my neck. The chatter near the entrance began to die down. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd as people recognized the discarded, supposedly broken wife who was meant to be hiding in shame. It took Marcus exactly 30 seconds to notice the shift in the room's energy. He turned, his triumphant smile freezing instantly on his face the second his eyes locked onto mine. He shoved his scotch glass into the hands of a passing waiter and marched straight toward me, his jaw clenched with barely contained fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" Simone Marcus hissed, keeping his voice dangerously low so his wealthy audience would not hear the panic bleeding into his tone. He stopped mere inches from my face, his eyes raking over my emerald gown with an ugly, mocking sneer. "And what is this exactly? Did you completely max out your little government credit cards just to rent a dress for the night? You are embarrassing yourself. Go home before I have you publicly escorted out." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I offered him a serene, pitying smile. "I bought this outright, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "Because true Black excellence does not need to be rented or faked. It is owned. And unlike you, my account's actually clear." His eyes narrowed, a rapid flash of genuine confusion crossing his face, before his signature arrogance aggressively returned. Before he could unleash another string of insults, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped up seamlessly to my right side. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried an air of quiet, absolute authority. "Marcus," I said smoothly, gesturing to the imposing man beside me. "I do not believe you have had the pleasure. This is my +1 for the evening, my colleague James." James extended a firm, steady hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Marcus," James said, his voice deep and entirely unreadable. "I have been following your career very closely." Marcus puffed out his chest, taking the handshake with an aggressive, dominant squeeze. He had absolutely no idea he was shaking hands with the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. Marcus simply saw another man he needed to impress. "Well, James," Marcus bragged, flashing his bright, artificial smile, "you are looking at the future of global wealth management. I hope Simone has not bored you too much with her small-minded perspective. We operate in two completely different stratospheres." "We certainly do," James replied, retracting his hand and placing it calmly in his pocket. "But I have a feeling your business model is going to make history tonight." Marcus preened at the compliment, entirely missing the devastating double meaning. Before he could boast any further, the sharp clicking of aggressive heels echoed across the marble floor. Vivian and Keisha descended upon us like a pair of starving vultures. Vivian wore a heavy beaded gown that looked absurdly uncomfortable, adorned with thick diamond necklaces funded by a reverse mortgage she would never be able to repay. Keisha dragged an oversized fur coat behind her, though a faint sheen of nervous sweat glistened on her forehead. The declined credit card incident in the penthouse was clearly still eating at her, but she was masking her panic with pure bravado. Simone Vivian snapped, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom as she looked me up and down. "Chantel told me she accidentally sent an invite to your old email address. It was a clerical error. You have absolutely no right to be standing in this room. You are trespassing on my son's legacy. You need to leave immediately," Keisha chimed in, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "This is a platinum tier event. We do not have time to deal with bitter, jealous ex-wives trying to ruin our family celebration. I am going to signal the valet to bring your cheap car around right now." Vivian raised her hand aggressively, snapping her manicured fingers toward a burly private security guard standing near the ballroom entrance. "I am having you thrown out into the street," Vivian declared loudly, ensuring the nearby guests heard her false sense of authority. I stood perfectly still. I reached over to a passing silver tray, picked up a crystal flute of vintage champagne, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid coated my throat as I looked at the two women who had spent a decade trying to break my spirit. "I wouldn't worry about me, Vivian," I said, my voice cutting through the lavish ballroom with chilling clarity. "I'd worry about the caterers asking for payment." Vivian's face flushed a mottled, ugly red at my comment. Keisha practically choked on her champagne, her hand instinctively flying to her throat. Before either of them could summon a sufficiently venomous response, James placed a steady guiding hand on my lower back. "If you ladies will excuse us," James said, his voice carrying that effortless, undeniable authority that naturally commanded immediate compliance. "We need to find our table." I did not look back as we walked away. I could feel their furious glares burning into my spine, but their petty outrage was entirely irrelevant now. The countdown clock was officially ticking. The ballroom was a masterclass in aggressive ostentation. Massive ice sculptures anchoring raw seafood bars began to drip under the heavy, warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved through the crowd with practiced urgency, ensuring no guest ever held an empty glass for more than a few seconds. It was a perfectly choreographed illusion of limitless wealth. James and I claimed a small high-top table near the back of the room, offering us a panoramic view of the impending disaster without drawing unnecessary attention. A sharp melodic ringing echoed across the ballroom as Marcus tapped a silver spoon against his crystal tumbler. The string quartet faded into silence. The low murmur of the affluent crowd died down as the spotlight snapped onto the velvet-draped stage. Marcus stepped up to the microphone, adjusting his custom lapels. He looked out over the sea of faces, his chest puffed with absolute blinding arrogance. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the gilded walls. "Tonight is not just a celebration of Blackwood Platinum wealth. It is a celebration of evolution. It is about understanding that to reach the absolute pinnacle of success, you have to be willing to shed the things that keep you grounded." He paused, letting the silence stretch for dramatic effect. His eyes swept across the room, bypassing the local politicians, the eager investors, and his wealthy fraternity brothers, locking directly onto me. I met his gaze without flinching. "To build an empire," Marcus continued, his tone dropping into something darker, something thinly veiled and aggressively misogynistic, "you need absolute, fearless commitment. You cannot fly with anchors wrapped around your ankles. You cannot conquer the financial world when you are chained to small-minded, fearful dead weight." He smirked, taking a slow, dramatic sip of his scotch. "I spent 10 years trying to drag dead weight up the mountain," he declared, his voice ringing with self-righteousness. "But today, I cut the cord. Today, I am surrounded by visionaries who understand that true power requires ruthless execution." He raised his glass high above his head. "To the future, unburdened and unstoppable." The crowd erupted into polite, measured applause. A few guests cast uncomfortable sidelong glances in my direction, clearly recognizing the intended target of his speech. I did not break eye contact with Marcus. I simply stood there, radiating absolute calm. He wanted me to look shattered. He wanted me to look publicly humiliated. Instead, I looked like a woman holding a detonator. While Marcus stood basking in the adulation of a crowd he had essentially bought with stolen money, the real crisis was quietly unfolding in the shadows. Near the heavy service doors at the edge of the stage, Chantel was standing in her tight sequined dress, beaming up at Marcus. But her proud, victorious smile faltered when the Ritz-Carlton's senior banquet manager approached her. The manager looked absolutely frantic. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his usual polished hotelier composure was completely gone. He pulled Chantel a few steps back, into the service corridor, out of the direct line of sight of the guests, but perfectly visible from my vantage point. He held a leather payment folio and a digital processing tablet tightly in his hands. Chantel looked highly annoyed by the interruption, crossing her arms defensively. I could not hear their conversation over the applause and the resuming string quartet, but their body language told the entire story. The manager aggressively tapped his tablet, pointing at the screen. Chantel shook her head, retrieving Marcus's heavy metallic black American Express card from her designer clutch. She shoved it into the manager's chest. The manager shook his head violently. He swiped the card through the reader again just to prove his point. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable red error code. The $100,000 event retainer had completely bounced. The hotel's automated financial system had flagged the transaction for suspected federal fraud, and the banking network had placed an immediate irreversible freeze on the account. Chantel's annoyance morphed into sheer panic. She grabbed another card from her clutch, practically shoving it at the manager. He swiped it. Red screen, declined. She pulled out a third card. Declined. The manager leaned in close to her, his face rigid with professional fury. He was giving her a strict ultimatum. Produce a viable authorized form of payment for the massive six-figure balance immediately, or the open bars would shut down. The kitchen would halt the catering service, and the entire gala would end right now. Chantel's face drained of all color. The smug, victorious mistress routine vanished in an instant, replaced by the terrified realization that she was standing at the epicenter of a massive financial collapse. She spun around her heels, slipping slightly on the polished marble as she scrambled toward the stage stairs. Marcus was still standing near the microphone, shaking hands with a state senator who had approached the stage to offer his personal congratulations. Chantel did not wait for the politician to leave. She practically sprinted up the steps, her sequined dress catching the bright spotlight. She grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him away from the microphone with a frantic, desperate energy. Marcus looked intensely irritated by the interruption, his jaw tight as he bent down to listen to her. Chantel cupped her hand over his ear and whispered the frantic news. I watched it happen in real time. The exact moment the grand illusion shattered. Marcus's smug, invincible smile dropped instantly. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow, sick, and utterly terrified. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated panic as the reality of the frozen accounts hit him. He looked up, his gaze sweeping frantically across the opulent ballroom until he found me standing near the back doors. I did not look away. I lifted my crystal flute of champagne, catching the chandelier light, and raised it toward him in a slow, silent, perfectly executed mocking toast. Marcus stared at me, completely paralyzed. The arrogant billionaire persona melted away in a fraction of a second, leaving behind a terrified, cornered animal. His chest heaved beneath his custom velvet jacket. The string quartet continued playing an upbeat classical symphony, completely unaware that the man paying their premium fee was currently imploding on his own stage. He did not say a single word to the state senator, still standing awkwardly beside him holding a microphone. Instead, Marcus grabbed Chantel by the wrist with a frantic vice-like grip. He yanked her away from the podium, practically dragging her toward the heavy gold-paneled service doors adjacent to the stage. They burst into the dim industrial service corridor. The heavy metal doors slammed shut behind them, instantly cutting off the lively chatter and the clinking glasses of the ballroom. The stark contrast was incredibly poetic. Out there, Marcus was a titan of industry. Back here, under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the hotel service wing, he was nothing but a fraud about to face federal prison. Marcus leaned heavily against the cold concrete wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He dug frantically into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out his smartphone. His hands were shaking so violently he dropped the device. It hit the linoleum floor with a sharp crack. He swore loudly, scrambling to his knees to snatch it up. He held it to his face, but the biometric scanner failed to recognize him. A thick layer of cold, panicked sweat coated his forehead, distorting his features. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he manually typed in his complex security passcode, his thumbs slipping repeatedly over the glass screen. He opened the highly secured private banking application for Blackwood Platinum Wealth. The loading icon spun for 2 agonizing seconds. Then the screen flooded with red. A stark, bold banner stretched across the entire interface. Frozen! Federal hold! No, no, no! Marcus muttered frantically, his voice cracking into a high pitch of desperation. He backed out of the corporate account menu and opened his personal offshore ledger. The account, he loudly bragged, was completely untouchable by domestic regulations. The screen loaded. Frozen. Federal hold. He opened the shared family trust account he managed with his mother and Brad. Frozen. Federal hold. The federal government had not just frozen his primary checking accounts. They had orchestrated a synchronized systemic lockdown of every single financial asset attached to his digital footprint. He was completely, irreversibly locked out of his own life. Chantel crowded into his personal space, peering over his broad shoulder. The harsh fluorescent light illuminated the absolute horror spreading across her heavily contoured face as she read the glaring red error messages. "What exactly does that mean?" Marcus Chantel demanded. Her voice lost its usual breathy, flirtatious tone, replaced instantly by a sharp grating edge of pure panic. "The banquet manager is threatening to cut the main power to the ballroom. He said the card declined 3 times. Why are your accounts frozen?" Marcus could barely form a coherent sentence. He aggressively ripped off his silk bow tie, unbuttoning the top of his pristine white dress shirt as if the fabric were actively choking him. "It is a mistake," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the empty concrete hallway, looking for an escape route that did not exist. "It has to be a clerical error. The SEC must have triggered an automated audit because of the massive volume of offshore capital I moved today. I just need to call my attorney. I just need to get on a secure line and clear this up." "You do not get a federal hold for a simple clerical error," Marcus Chantel snapped, stepping back from him in pure, unfiltered disgust. "My father was a corporate auditor. I know exactly what a federal freeze looks like. It means they know. It means the money is gone." "What did you do?" The sheer suffocating panic finally shattered the last remaining wall of his massive ego. The absolute reality of the situation crushed him completely. He slid down the concrete wall, resting his head heavily against his knees. "There is no offshore capital," Marcus whispered, the massive confession tumbling out of him in a breathless, defeated rush. "There never was. The new investors did not wire any funds. I was paying the old investors with the new deposits. I over-leveraged the commercial strip malls to fund this entire gala. I cross-collateralized the industrial distribution centers just to cover the deposit on your luxury penthouse. I used Brad and Keisha's family trust fund to pay the public relations firm. The commercial banks hold all the paper. If the federal authorities froze the operational accounts tonight, the commercial lenders will trigger an immediate default by morning. I have absolutely nothing left. It is all gone." Chantel stared down at the man she had been treating like a financial deity for the past 6 months. The grand illusion was entirely broken. She did not look at him with a single ounce of sympathy or concern. She looked at him like he was a rotting piece of garbage that had severely inconvenienced her evening schedule. "You are broke," Chantel stated, her voice utterly devoid of any warmth or affection. "You brought me to a luxury hotel, paraded me in front of the entire city as your new executive partner, and you cannot even pay the catering bill." Marcus looked up, a pathetic, desperate pleading shining in his eyes. "Chantel, listen to me, we can fix this. I still have industry connections. We just need to leave quietly through the loading dock. We can go to your apartment, regroup, and figure out a survival strategy. I just need you to stand by me right now." Chantel let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed viciously off the concrete walls. "Stand by you? Are you completely out of your mind? Do you honestly think I sat through those agonizing multi-hour dinners listening to you brag about your non-existent portfolio because I found your personality charming? I tolerated your arrogant rants because you explicitly promised to wire $5 million into my LLC tomorrow morning to fund my luxury lifestyle brand. I am 24 years old, Marcus. I am not going down with a sinking ship, and I am certainly not dating a broke middle-aged fraud who is about to be federally indicted." She reached around the back of her neck, Her manicured fingers quickly found the heavy platinum clasp of the $50,000 diamond tennis necklace Marcus had purchased for her just last week. He had used stolen investor capital to buy her affection, desperate to prove he could afford a woman exactly like her. Chantel unhooked the clasp in one fluid motion. She did not gently hand it back to him. She hurled the heavy string of diamonds directly at his chest. The expensive jewelry struck his velvet lapel and clattered loudly against the linoleum floor, scattering a few loose stones into the dark, dirty corners of the service corridor. "I would say it was nice knowing you," Marcus Chantel said, smoothing down the front of her sequined dress to regain her composure. "But it honestly was not. Have a wonderful time explaining this to the federal authorities." She turned sharply on her stiletto heel and marched toward the heavy metal doors of the service elevator at the far end of the hall. She slammed her hand flat against the call button. The doors slid open instantly. She stepped inside, not looking back a single time as the metal doors closed, sealing her rapid exit. Marcus was left sitting alone on the cold floor, the discarded diamonds resting near his designer shoes, hyperventilating in the dim, empty hallway as the muffled sound of the string quartet continued to play from the oblivious ballroom. Marcus scooped the discarded diamond necklace off the cold linoleum, shoving it hastily into the pocket of his custom velvet jacket. He took a ragged, uneven breath, running a shaking hand over his sweating forehead. Delusion was a powerful, intoxicating drug, and Marcus had been high on it for a decade. He convinced himself he could fix this. He told himself he could just call his offshore broker, charm the bank managers in the morning, and stall the furious caterers for a few more hours. He pushed his shoulders back, pasting that sickeningly confident artificial smile firmly onto his face. He pushed through the heavy service doors and stepped back into the glittering ballroom. The string quartet was transitioning into a lively, upbeat waltz, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man signing their checks was completely bankrupt. He barely made it to the center of the oak dance floor when the main ballroom doors flew open. The heavy wood did not just swing ajar, it slammed against the interior walls with a deafening sound like a gunshot. The string quartet screeched to a sudden jarring halt, the lead cellist dragging his bow harshly across the strings. The entire ballroom fell dead silent. It was not the dessert course being wheeled in. It was 24 federal agents. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with FBI and SEC emblazoned across the back in stark, authoritative yellow lettering. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, immediately fanning out across the room to secure every exit and block the elevators. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal vehicles parked outside began to pulse through the sheer curtains of the hotel windows. The man who had been standing quietly at my side, my supposed +1, stepped forward. James reached into his tailored charcoal suit jacket, withdrew his gold federal badge, and held it high above his head. "Nobody moves," James announced, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them and step away from the exits." The collective gasp from Atlanta's elite sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Socialites dropped their champagne flutes, the crystal shattering sharply against the marble floor. Politicians and eager investors immediately backed away from the gold Blackwood platinum banners, desperately trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Vivian stepped forward, her heavy beaded gown clanking loudly as she marched toward the lead agents. She was completely immune to reality, still operating under the delusion that her last name held absolute power. "What is the meaning of this?" Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing across the silent room. "This is a private elite event. We rented this entire floor. You are ruining my son's rebranding gala. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge immediately." Brad stepped up right beside her, puffing out his chest and adjusting his tuxedo jacket. He looked at the federal agents with the unmistakable, arrogant glare of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire life. He honestly believed his country club connections made him untouchable. "Listen here," Brad commanded, pointing a rigid finger directly at James. "I do not know what kind of bureaucratic mix-up this is, but you need to clear your people out right now. I have 2 state senators on speed dial. I play golf with the governor. If you do not turn your men around and walk out those doors, I will have your badges by tomorrow morning." James did not even blink. He looked at Brad with a calm, predatory stillness. "Bradford Sterling?" James asked smoothly. Brad lifted his chin, sneering. "That is right." James gestured to 2 tactical agents standing nearby. "Take him." Before Brad could utter another syllable of entitled protest, the agents moved in. They grabbed him by the shoulders, spinning him around forcefully and slamming his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly over the horrified whispers of the wealthy crowd. Keisha let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her designer clutch. "Brad, what are you doing? Let him go!" Brad struggled against the agents, his face turning a blotchy, furious crimson. "You cannot do this. I am a victim here. I am a legitimate investor. My accounts are perfectly legal." James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hard, unforgiving register. "Your accounts were seized exactly 20 minutes ago, Mr. Sterling. The $2 million you wired into Blackwood Financial this morning has been confiscated as federal evidence. You are under arrest for active participation in a criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." Keisha collapsed onto her knees, sobbing hysterically into her oversized fur coat. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. The $2 million was gone. Her trust fund was vaporized. Her husband was going to federal prison. Her entire identity had just been wiped out in front of 400 people. Vivian stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, entirely unable to comprehend the absolute destruction of her family's false empire. And then there was Marcus. He had backed away from the center of the room, attempting to blend into the terrified crowd, but the agents were already on him. They grabbed his arms, forcing them behind his back and securing the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. His custom velvet jacket bunched up awkwardly. The agents began marching Marcus aggressively through the center of the ballroom, right down the middle of the dance floor, where he was supposed to be giving his victory speech. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, staring at him with a mixture of shock and utter disgust. As they hauled him toward the exit, his eyes locked onto me. I was still standing near the back, my posture perfectly straight, my emerald green gown glowing under the chandeliers. The timeline suddenly clicked in his panicked brain. The frozen accounts, the FBI director standing next to me. My absolute, unwavering calm. Marcus thrashed against the agent's grip, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He strained his neck, screaming at the top of his lungs so the entire ballroom could hear him. "You did this. You set me up. You ruined my life, Simone." I took one step forward, ensuring my voice carried clearly over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. "You demanded everything in the divorce, Marcus," I replied, my tone icy and resolute. "Now you have it." The harsh buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights in Federal Interrogation Room 4 offered no comfort the next morning. Marcus was sitting alone at the cold steel table, still wearing the wrinkled, sweat-stained tuxedo pants and unbuttoned dress shirt from the gala. The velvet jacket had been confiscated. His posture was rigid with misplaced, indignant arrogance. He spent the last 8 hours screaming at the two-way mirror, demanding to speak to his high-priced defense attorney, demanding a phone call to the governor, and threatening to sue the entire Department of Justice for defamation. He honestly believed he could charm or bully his way out of a federal holding cell. He thought this was merely a temporary inconvenience, a massive misunderstanding that his wealth and status would instantly erase. The heavy metal lock disengaged with a sharp, heavy clack. Marcus sat back, crossing his arms over his chest, expecting to see a fatigued federal prosecutor or a tired SEC investigator walking through the door ready to offer an apology. Instead, the door swung open, and I stepped into the stark, windowless room. I was no longer wearing the emerald green silk gown. I was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal federal suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense style. I carried a thick, heavy leather briefcase. I did not say a word as I walked to the opposite side of the steel table. Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging slightly open as his brain aggressively rejected the image in front of him. Simone Marcus sneered, his voice raspy from a night of shouting. He leaned forward, a vicious, mocking smile returning to his face. Did they call you in here to identify my assets? Are you here to beg the government for a piece of the pie before they freeze everything? You need to leave. I am waiting for my attorney, and I do not have time to deal with a bitter ex-wife trying to capitalize on a clerical error. I did not respond to his taunts. I simply opened my leather briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out my solid gold federal credential wallet. I tossed it onto the center of the metal table. It landed with a heavy, undeniable thud right in front of his handcuffed wrists. Marcus looked down. The gold shield gleamed under the harsh lighting. The bold, deeply engraved letters spelled out Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. His eyes darted from the badge to my face, and for the very first time in our entire 10-year history, Marcus was completely, terrifyingly speechless. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. I sat down, opening a massive, meticulously organized manila folder. I folded my hands together, resting them on the table, and looked directly into his panicked eyes. There is no clerical error, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. I am the lead federal investigator assigned to your case. I have spent the last 18 months actively dismantling your entire financial existence. He tried to speak, but only a dry, breathless wheeze escaped his throat. He shook his head violently, pressing his back against the metal chair. You loved to tell me I lacked vision. I continued, flipping open the first page of the dossier. You told everyone I was just a low-level accountant, incapable of understanding high-level wealth. But your vision was nothing but a transparent, poorly constructed Ponzi scheme. Let us review the facts. You established 3 offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. You aggressively funneled new investor capital into those shells, falsifying the quarterly return ledgers to make it look like the Platinum Tier Fund was generating a 30% yield. I turned the page, sliding a stack of highlighted wire transfer records toward him. But there was no yield, Marcus. You never invested a single dime of that money. You used the fresh capital from clients like Bradford Sterling to pay off the older investors, creating a completely fabricated illusion of massive success. And while you were running that fraudulent carousel, you skimmed over $4 million off the top to fund your pathetic midlife crisis. You used stolen pension funds to lease your luxury cars. You used college savings accounts to pay for VIP tables at nightclubs. You literally bought Chantel a $50,000 diamond necklace using the stolen retirement savings of a 65-year-old retired schoolteacher. Marcus was physically shaking now. His chest heaved as the absolute reality of his federal indictment crushed the last remaining fragments of his ego. He stared at the printed ledgers, recognizing his own hidden account numbers, realizing that I had seen every single dirty, illegal move he had made. But Marcus was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out. He slammed his handcuffed fists onto the metal table, the chain rattling aggressively against the steel. The fear in his eyes was suddenly replaced by a desperate, venomous malice. You think you are so smart? Simone Marcus hissed, leaning across the table, his face twisted in ugly defiance. You think you trapped me, but you forgot one massive, undeniable detail. We were legally married for 10 years while I was building this firm. We filed joint tax returns. My name is on the mortgage of the house you live in. If this is a criminal enterprise, you are tied to it. You benefited from the money. You ate the food. You lived the lifestyle. The federal government does not care about your little badge if you are married to the kingpin. If I am going down for federal wire fraud, you are coming right down with me. We are legally bound, Simone. You are equally liable. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply let him finish his frantic, desperate threat, letting the silence hang in the cold interrogation room for 5 long seconds. Then I reached into the very back of my manila folder and pulled out a single, pristine legal document. I placed it flat on the table and slowly slid it across the cold steel until it rested directly under his chin. I tapped my manicured fingernail twice against the bold black heading at the top of the page. It was the finalized court-certified decree from our divorce mediation. Specifically, it was open to page 14, the indemnification and hold harmless agreement. You really should read the fine print before you sign legally binding contracts, Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. Marcus looked down at the document. His eyes frantically scanned the dense legal jargon. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. When you sat in that mediation room, I explained slowly, ensuring every single word penetrated his thick skull. You were absolutely obsessed with keeping 100% of Blackwood Financial. You were so blinded by greed, so terrified that I might take half of your supposedly massive empire that you ordered your overpriced lawyers to draft the most aggressive liability waiver possible. You wanted to ensure I had absolutely no claim to the company's profits, and more importantly, you wanted to hide your assets to completely avoid paying child support and alimony for Jamal and Jada. Marcus was staring at his own signature at the bottom of the page, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. To achieve that, I continued leaning back in my chair with absolute satisfaction. You voluntarily and legally absorbed 100% of the firm's criminal and civil liability. You signed a binding federal affidavit swearing that I had zero knowledge, zero involvement, and zero operational control over Blackwood Financial. You legally severed me from every single corporate entity you own to protect your greed. In your rush to leave me and your children with absolutely nothing, you built a bulletproof legal fortress around me. I am completely insulated. You paid your own lawyers to build your coffin. Marcus let out a ragged, agonizing sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The sheer weight of his own profound stupidity finally broke him. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire persona shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He slumped forward, burying his face in his handcuffed hands. "Simone, please." Marcus wept. The tears spilled over his fingers, hitting the cold steel table. "Please, you cannot do this to me. I am the father of your children. We built a life together. You are the love of my life. I was lost. I was confused. Please, you know all the prosecutors. You can talk to the director. You can cut me a deal. I will do anything. I will give you everything. Please, Simone, do not let them lock me away in a cage. I will not survive in there. Please help me." He reached across the table, his trembling handcuffed fingers desperately clawing toward my arm. I stood up smoothly, stepping entirely out of his reach. I closed my manila folder, securing the clasp on my leather briefcase with a sharp, decisive snap. I looked down at the pathetic weeping man who had spent a decade treating me like a disposable accessory. He was completely broken, stripped of his wealth, his mistress, his pride, and his freedom. "I am just a low-level accountant, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the sterile room. "I could not possibly understand your million-dollar vision." I turned on my heel and walked out, letting the heavy steel door slam shut behind me, leaving Marcus Blackwood crying alone in the dark. The morning sun offered no warmth through the heavily tinted windows of the federal building. I stepped out through the revolving glass doors, inhaling the crisp air, feeling the distinct, undeniable lightness of a woman who had just excised a 10-year tumor from her life. The suffocating weight of the Blackwood family's expectations, their constant belittling, and their fragile, toxic empire was entirely gone. I was walking toward my car when my phone began vibrating violently in my tailored jacket pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed Bradford Sterling. I let it ring 3 times before slowly sliding my thumb across the green icon. I did not even get a chance to say hello. "Simone, you have to fix this right now!" Brad was practically hyperventilating into the receiver. The chaotic background noise of blaring car horns and busy city traffic echoed through the speaker. I am standing outside the main branch of First Fidelity. The tellers are treating me like a criminal. They are telling me every single account attached to my social security number has been seized. My business accounts, my personal savings, Keisha's entire trust fund, $5 million, Simone. It is all gone. You need to call your people and clear my name. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I did not start the engine. I simply sat there listening to the rapid unraveling of a man who genuinely believed his privilege made him immune to consequences. I cannot do that, Brad. I said, my voice completely level and clinical. The federal government seized those assets because they are the direct proceeds of a massive wire fraud conspiracy. You willingly wired $2 million into a fraudulent offshore ledger. You are now an active participant in an ongoing federal investigation. I am a victim. Brad screamed, his voice cracking into a high pitch of panic. Marcus lied to me. He showed me fake projections. You are the lead investigator. You knew this was happening. You knew he was running a Ponzi scheme, and you let me walk right into it. You should have warned me. You had a moral obligation to stop me from making that transfer. I leaned back against the leather headrest, letting a cold, humorless laugh escape my lips. I did warn you, Brad. I reminded him, my tone sharpening into a precise blade. Do you remember our little meeting at the coffee shop? I sat across from you and explicitly told you that Marcus was dangerously overleveraged. I handed you the absolute truth on a silver platter. But you refused to listen. You sat there with your arrogant, condescending smirk and dismissed every single word I said. You looked at a highly qualified, federally trained black woman who managed that firm's books for a decade, and you decided my financial literacy was inferior to Marcus's tailored suits and empty promises. Brad stammered, his breath catching in his throat. That was different. You sounded like a bitter ex-wife. I was making a strategic business decision based on the market data Marcus provided. You made a decision based on your own massive ego, I corrected him harshly. You wanted to play with the big boys. You wanted to prove you were the smartest man in the room. You chose to ignore a direct factual warning because your white savior complex convinced you that you knew better than I did. Your arrogance blinded you to the most obvious financial red flags I have ever seen in my entire career. You handed your money to a criminal because he validated your superiority complex. Simone, please, you do not understand. Brad begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic, desperate whine. Keisha is losing her mind. She is screaming at me in the middle of the street. She just threatened to call a divorce lawyer. She says I destroyed her family legacy. She is taking the kids to her mother's house. You have to use your federal pull. You have to get my money back. I am going to lose my wife. I am going to lose everything. I started the engine of my car, the quiet hum of the motor filling the silence. You already lost it, Brad. Have your lawyer contact the SEC. Do not ever call this number again. I pressed the red button, cutting off his frantic sobbing mid-sentence. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pulled out of the parking lot. The morning traffic was light and my schedule was entirely clear, but the fallout of Marcus's collapsed empire was far from over. While Brad was melting down on a public sidewalk, an entirely different kind of destruction was arriving at the wrought iron gates of the historic Blackwood estate. Vivian Blackwood had spent her entire adult life cultivating an image of impenetrable old money royalty. She hosted charity galas in her massive manicured gardens. She forced the local society pages to photograph her standing grandly on her sweeping marble staircase. She truly believed the walls of her mansion protected her from the realities of the world. She was brutally incorrect. 3 heavy black tactical vehicles pulled up to the gated entrance of the estate. The federal marshals did not bother buzzing the intercom. They used heavy bolt cutters to sever the electronic locking mechanism, pushing the massive iron gates open by hand. A dozen armed marshals marched directly up the pristine circular driveway. My phone rang again just as I was pulling into my driveway. The caller ID flashed Vivian Blackwood. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the absolute irony of the moment was simply too rich to ignore. I answered the call. Simone Vivian shrieked, her voice stripped of its usual haughty, refined elegance. It was raw, terrified, and shaking with pure panic. They are in my house. Men with guns are in my foyer. They are telling me I have to leave. They are putting seizure notices on my front door. You have to stop them. You have to tell them this house belongs to me. It has been in my family for 3 generations. I stepped out of my car, locking it with a sharp beep. The house does not belong to you anymore, Vivian, I said smoothly. It belongs to the federal government. Marcus used the deed to your historic estate as collateral to secure a massive commercial loan to fund his fraudulent activities. When the firm defaulted this morning, the federal authorities seized the property to begin paying back the victims he defrauded. He would never do that, Vivian screamed, her voice echoing wildly over the phone. Marcus is a good man. He is a visionary. This is a mistake. You are doing this to punish me. I am your mother-in-law, Simone. We are family. You need to show some family loyalty. You need to remember the church community. What will the congregation say when they see you throwing an elderly woman out onto the street? You have to let me stay with you. I need a place to stay. I stopped walking, standing perfectly still on my front porch. The absolute audacity of her request was breathtaking. Family loyalty. I repeated, letting the words hang heavily in the air. Let us talk about family loyalty, Vivian. Let us talk about how you treated my parents at our wedding. My mother was a public school teacher and my father was a transit worker. They worked their entire lives to give me a chance at success. And you sat at the head table and openly mocked their working-class background. You told your country club friends that Marcus was marrying down. You weaponized the church against me, gossiping to the entire congregation that I was not a suitable wife for your precious, perfect son. You treated me like dirt on your designer shoes for 10 straight years. Simone, please? Vivian sobbed, the sound of heavy boots marching across her marble floors echoing through the receiver. I was just protecting my son. I was protecting our legacy. You are a Christian woman. You have to forgive me. I am a federal agent, Vivian, and I only deal in facts, I replied coldly. The fact is, your son is a criminal. Your legacy is a total fraud, and your house is currently federal property. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before the marshals physically remove you. I hung up the phone, sliding it into my pocket as I walked through my front door. Miles away inside the cavernous, echoing foyer of the seized mansion, Vivian Blackwood collapsed onto the bottom step of her grand staircase. The federal marshals stood impassively by the front doors, checking their watches. Her hands shook violently as she realized no one was coming to save her. The domestic staff had already fled the moment the federal vehicles breached the gates. A female marshal approached her, handing her a box of heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. You have 45 minutes, ma'am, the marshal stated flatly. You are permitted to take personal clothing and essential toiletries. All artwork, jewelry, and high-value items must remain on the premises pending federal audit. Vivian dragged herself up the stairs. Her breathing labored. The woman who had spent decades dictating the social hierarchy of Atlanta was reduced to frantically shoving designer dresses and silk scarves into cheap plastic garbage bags. She wept openly, the mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks as she hauled the heavy bags down the marble steps. She stood shivering on the edge of the driveway, surrounded by 4 lumpy trash bags containing the absolute sum total of her existence. The federal marshals locked the heavy front doors behind her, affixing a bright red federal seizure notice across the polished wood. A vehicle slowly turned into the driveway. It was not a chauffeured black car. It was not the luxury SUV she was accustomed to riding in. It was a dented 15-year-old Honda Civic. The passenger door opened and Keisha stepped out. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her posture defeated. Brad's assets were completely frozen, leaving Keisha with nothing but the old commuter car she had owned since college. Vivian stared at the rusted vehicle, her face crumbling in utter humiliation. She grabbed the first plastic trash bag, dragging it across the pristine driveway toward the battered car. The grand facade of generational wealth had been completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality of the mess they had made. The swift and unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system did not care about Marcus Blackwood's former social status. 6 months after the raid on the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, Marcus sat at the defense table in a sterile, wood-paneled federal courtroom. The transformation was jarring. The impeccably tailored suits and arrogant smirks were entirely gone, replaced by an ill-fitting standard-issue khaki jumpsuit and a hollow, terrified stare. His hair was unkempt, his posture defeated. He had spent the last half-year in a federal detention center, stripped of his offshore accounts, his luxury cars, and his sycophantic enablers. Every single motion his overworked public defender filed had been systematically dismantled by the prosecution. The evidence I had meticulously gathered and handed over was absolutely bulletproof. There was no plea deal on the table. There was only the sentencing hearing. The federal judge, a stern, gray-haired woman with a reputation for handing down maximum penalties in white-collar crime cases, peered over her glasses at the defense table. She had just spent the last hour reading through the staggering financial ruin Marcus had inflicted upon hundreds of innocent people. Retired teachers who had lost their pensions, small business owners forced into bankruptcy. The collateral damage of his ego was catastrophic. Sensing the absolute hostility radiating from the bench, Marcus's attorney stood up, straightening his cheap suit jacket in a desperate final attempt to secure leniency. He cleared his throat, attempting to paint a picture of a man who simply got in over his head. "Your Honor," the attorney began, his voice echoing in the vast courtroom, "we acknowledge the severity of the financial discrepancies. However, we ask the court to consider my client's humanity. Marcus Blackwood is not a hardened criminal. He is a father. He has young, impressionable twins, a boy and a girl, who desperately need their father's presence in their lives. Sending him to federal prison for decades would permanently sever that vital family bond. We ask for a reduced sentence so that he might one day have the opportunity to actively participate in raising his children and making amends." Marcus nodded vigorously, forcing a few pathetic tears to well up in his eyes. He looked toward the judge, playing the role of the tragic, repentant family man perfectly. The judge remained entirely unmoved. She looked toward the prosecution table where I sat as the lead financial investigator and the primary victim of his marital fraud. The lead prosecutor stood, gestured toward me, and requested permission to submit a final piece of documentation into the official court record. The judge granted the request. I stood up, holding a single heavy blue folder. The rhythmic click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a ticking clock as I walked deliberately toward the judge's bench. I did not look at Marcus. I handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "Your Honor," I stated clearly, my voice carrying to the very back rows of the gallery, where a few of his defrauded investors sat watching. "The defense has just requested leniency based on Mr. Blackwood's supposed devotion to his children. The document you are holding is a certified court-ordered divorce decree, finalized and signed by the defendant himself less than a year ago." I turned slightly, finally allowing my gaze to lock onto Marcus. The fake tears instantly vanished from his eyes, replaced by a stark, absolute panic. He knew exactly what document I had handed over. I direct the court's attention to page 42, section 4. I continued, my tone sharp and unyielding. During our divorce mediation, the defendant was legally obligated to provide basic child support for his 7-year-old twins based on his reported corporate income. Instead of paying a modest monthly stipend to feed and clothe his own flesh and blood, Marcus Blackwood directed his attorneys to draft a total relinquishment of parental rights. He voluntarily and legally terminated all physical custody, legal custody, and visitation rights. He completely erased himself from his children's lives entirely to avoid writing a child support check. He traded his son and daughter for cash, Your Honor. He is not a father. He is a predator who only invokes his children when he is cornered and desperate for a lighter sentence. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The defense attorney slowly sank back into his chair, rubbing his face in defeat. He had not known about the custody relinquishment. Marcus had lied to his own lawyer. The judge stared at the document for a long, agonizing minute. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the edges of the heavy paper. When she finally looked up, the disgust on her face was palpable. She fixed her gaze on Marcus, her voice vibrating with a cold, righteous fury. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge began, her words striking him like physical blows. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have presided over violent cartels, organized crime syndicates, and ruthless corporate embezzlers. But the level of sociopathic greed required to sell your own children to protect a fraudulent bank account is a special breed of depravity. You built a lavish empire on the broken backs of hardworking citizens, and you discarded your own family the moment they became a financial inconvenience. You are a parasite on society. Marcus shrank back, his shoulders trembling. There will be no leniency today, the judge declared, striking her heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block with a resounding crack. Marcus Blackwood, I sentence you to 180 months, 15 years in federal prison. There will be no possibility of early parole. You will serve every single day of that sentence. This court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in hushed, relieved murmurs. Two federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Marcus by the upper arms and hauling him to his feet. They turned him toward the heavy wooden side doors leading to the holding cells. As they dragged him away, Marcus dug his heels into the floor, twisting his neck to look over his shoulder. He looked directly at me. His face was a twisted mask of desperation. He wanted me to gloat. He wanted me to sneer. He wanted me to show any sign of anger, hatred, or even pity. He desperately needed a reaction to validate his existence, to prove that he still mattered, that he still had some kind of impact on my life. I gave him absolutely nothing. I stood at the prosecution table, packing my legal pads into my briefcase. I briefly met his gaze, my expression completely blank, my eyes empty of any emotion. I looked right through him, treating him with the exact same level of significance one might give a smudge on a window pane. He no longer occupied a single square inch of my mind. The absolute erasure of his massive ego was his ultimate punishment. He sagged against the marshals, weeping openly as the heavy wooden doors swallowed him into the dark. 1 year later, the bright golden morning sun reflected brilliantly off the sleek hood of my SUV as I merged onto the highway heading toward downtown Atlanta. The air conditioning hummed quietly, competing with the joyful, chaotic sounds of Jamal and Jada singing along to a cartoon soundtrack playing on the tablet in the back seat. They were 8 years old now, healthy, vibrant, and completely shielded from the toxic, fraudulent world their biological father had attempted to drag them into. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, a deep, profound sense of peace settling into my chest. I merged into the exit lane, navigating the bustling city streets, until we reached the newly revitalized South Side Commercial District. I pulled the SUV into a massive, freshly paved parking lot, surrounded by a sprawling, beautifully modern commercial plaza. The transformation of this space over the last 12 months had been nothing short of miraculous. The plaza was alive with vibrant, legitimate energy. The anchor tenant was a massive Black-owned organic grocery store, its glass doors sliding open constantly to welcome neighborhood residents. Flanking the grocery store were rows of thriving businesses, an independent bookstore, a bustling coffee roaster, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a beautiful, brightly painted community preschool with a safely enclosed, shaded playground. Local artists had painted gorgeous, inspiring murals across the brick facades, turning the previously neglected commercial strip into a beacon of community wealth. I parked the car in a reserved space near the front and unbuckled the twins, setting them on their feet on the warm pavement. They immediately grabbed my hands, pulling me eagerly toward the preschool entrance. "Look at the bright colors," Mommy Jada squealed, pointing at a mural of a massive blooming sunflower painted near the playground. "It is beautiful, baby," I smiled, squeezing her small hand. We walked slowly along the wide, clean sidewalks. Shop owners waved at me through their display windows. A few residents stopped to say good morning. There was a genuine, grounded respect here, completely devoid of the artificial status, obsessed posturing that had defined my former life in Buckhead. I stopped in front of the community center, crouching down to look my children in the eyes. I knew they were too young to fully comprehend the magnitude of what I was about to tell them, but I wanted the truth of this place to be woven into their earliest memories. "Do you see all of this?" I asked softly, sweeping my hand to encompass the sprawling, busy plaza. "Do you see the grocery store and the preschool and the bookstore?" Jamal nodded seriously, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Yes, Mommy. This belongs to you," I told them, my voice thick with absolute pride. "This entire plaza belongs to our family." It was the ultimate poetic victory. When Marcus's fraudulent empire was dismantled by the federal government, his assets were liquidated at federal auction to pay restitution to his victims. Among those assets were 3 massive neglected commercial strip malls he had illegally over-leveraged and allowed to rot. Using the clean, meticulously saved capital from my independent accounting firm and operating through a highly secure anonymous LLC, I had purchased the properties straight from the federal auction block for a fraction of their market value. I took the very physical assets Marcus had used to perpetrate his crimes and transformed them into a legitimate, thriving empire. I poured capital into massive renovations, deliberately leasing the commercial spaces to Black entrepreneurs, community leaders, and essential neighborhood services. I generated multiple robust streams of passive income, securing a financial foundation that would last for generations. I did not build an illusion of wealth to impress snobby country club elites. I built real, tangible, generational wealth rooted in solid concrete, clean money, and community empowerment. I stood up as the twins giggled, pulling away to run safely toward the heavy glass doors of the preschool where their teachers were waiting to greet them. I watched them go, my heart full. "Good morning, Simone." I turned to see David, the lead project manager I had hired to oversee the plaza's continued expansion. He was holding a clipboard, a warm, genuine smile on his face as he surveyed the bustling parking lot. "Good morning, David," I replied. "The new landscaping around the grocery entrance looks fantastic. You and the team did incredible work this week." He nodded appreciatively, looking out at the thriving businesses. "It is amazing what you have done here in just a year. The city council is already asking if you are planning to acquire the abandoned lots on the next block. We are changing the entire neighborhood." He paused, leaning against a brick pillar, studying me with a curious expression. "You know, I read an article about your former firm last week. The lifestyle you used to have. The mansions in Buckhead, the offshore accounts, the private jets, the society galas. It must be a massive adjustment. Do you ever miss it? Do you ever miss the luxury?" I looked out over the plaza. I watched a mother carrying fresh groceries to her car. I saw a young entrepreneur flipping the open sign on his new coffee shop. I heard my children laughing safely inside a school that my name was on the deed to. I thought about the heavy, suffocating anxiety of Marcus's fake empire, the constant lies, the unbearable weight of pretending to be something we were not. I turned back to David, a calm, unshakable smile spreading across my face. "You cannot miss a facade, David," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute undeniable clarity. "I prefer building on solid ground."